Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is July 18th, 2017, and I have to admit, it's a little bit weird for me to be starting another podcast because I just finished an epic 5-hour podcast interview with Laurie Lee. It was definitely one of my favorite interviews ever, where we talked about her experience as a transgender female within Mormonism. She served as a stake president and as lead architect on temples for the LDS Church for 20 years. And it was a wonderful interview. And I didn't plan to be doing 7 hours worth of podcast interviews in a single day, but here we are. I am just so super excited for today's interview as well. And so thanks for tuning in. We've already got 16 people joining us on Facebook Live. But for those who are joining us either live or asynchronously, we are doing part 4 in our series called Losing the Lamanites. So we had this idea to talk to various Mormons or post-Mormons throughout the world who were raised being told that they were Lamanites, so that they were descendants of Lehi, Laman, and Lemuel from the Book of Mormon. Maybe they had dark skin, maybe they didn't. Oftentimes they're from North America, Central or South America, or the Caribbean. But in all cases, we're trying to process with them not only sort of what their experiences were as Mormons in Latin America, or again as Native Americans or Polynesians, but then also what led to any challenges in faith that they may have experienced. And then finally, for these people that I'm interviewing, they no longer believe that the church is true anymore. In some cases, they're no longer members. And so we're talking about how they feel having been, in many cases, given an identity that either maybe they don't view as very healthy or as possibly very damaging, and in many cases false or untrue. Sounds like a heavy and serious and unpleasant topic, but we've had some amazing interviews so far. So we first interviewed Vania Moore, who talked about her experiences from Brazil. Definitely one of the most powerful interviews we've ever done, where Vania talks about how perfectionism led her to almost want to end her own life. Very powerful interview. Check it out. That's episodes 746 and 747. And then we had Hiram Joe, who is Navajo. He's an artist, a painter, a sensitive and brilliant individual, talking about being raised in the church in New Mexico as a Navajo, with his dad being, I think he was stake president. And support not Hiram Joe's art. He has some amazing artwork that deserves our support. And then the third interview that we did on Losing the Lamanites was, again, another really powerful tearjerker, Sarah Newcomb. I just met Sarah and her husband in Dallas when we did a Mormon Stories event there. Sarah comes from the Northwest Coastal Tribes, Tsimshian. I don't know that I'm pronouncing it right, but that was another really powerful episode where Sarah talked about being so earnest and desirous that she helped fulfill the prophecy that the Lamanites will blossom like a rose and that their skin will turn white and delightsome instead of dark and loathsome. Sarah shared how she would stay out of the sun and grow her hair long and wear long clothes and extra sunscreen to make sure that her skin would never turn darker, even in the summer, and how much shame she internalized during that process. It's worth mentioning, I think, just really briefly, that Sarah has started a new blog that may be turned into a podcast at some point. But I just want to make sure that everyone knows about it. I believe it's called Lamanite Truth. Lamanite Truth at .wordpress.com. I'll get you the exact link, but I'm really excited to announce Sarah's new blogging project. where she is going to be talking about the Native American, Latin American experience as it relates to Lamanites stuff. So that is set up for today's interview with Gabriel Misla. And before we actually bring Gabriel onto the show, I'm going to just go very quickly through a few quick announcements. August 11th and 12th in Salt Lake City, we're going to be doing a mixed faith marriage retreat with Dr. Julie de Azevedo Hanks and myself. It's almost full. We have close to 40 people. And if you've been delaying registering, register soon because it's about to fill up and we won't have enough people. I'm really excited about that one. September 14th and 15th will be in Seattle, Washington. October 20th through 22nd will be in Sydney, Australia. November 9th through 10th in the Bay Area. We're looking for nominations for events in 2018. If you want us to come to, let's say, DC or Boise or Phoenix or back to Vegas or Houston, wherever you want us to come with our workshops and retreats, we want to come. So email us at mormonstories@gmail.com and let us know if you want us to come to your area. We need to do some events in Salt Lake City and Provo and maybe Northern Utah. So if you want to be represented there, just let us know. We're looking for people to help us organize these events and to sort of help us get a sense that we'll have enough attendees to fill the events, although we've never had a problem so far. So if you want an event, even in Chicago or Atlanta or wherever, you just need to email us and let us know, and we'll do our best to make it happen. So those are all the announcements for today. We are really excited to have people joining with us on the internet. We think that that is going to make for a really interesting show. And so as we're getting ready to discuss things, I just want to encourage everybody to please start writing in your questions or comments or feedback. We would love to hear it, and we would love to incorporate what you have into what we're going to talk about. It makes it more interactive and fun. Yes, and thanks to my producer, I think it's Cody, either Cody or Amy. LamaniteTruth.wordpress.com is the new blog from Sarah Newcomb. So check that out if you care about this kind of stuff. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our fourth interview in the Losing the Lamanites series, Gabriel Misla, who was raised in Puerto Rico. So Gabriel, welcome to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Thank you, John.
And you're muted, Gabriel. Let me just see. I don't know if you muted on your end, but keep talking until I hear you, because I'm not hearing you for some reason. And I want to make sure that's not on my end. Keep talking. There you go. There you go. Now I hear you.
Okay, perfect.
Was that me or you?
I don't know.
Okay, Gabriel, welcome to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Thank you, John.
So anything you want to correct or add to my very long introduction?
No, that was great.
Okay. All right. So you tell us about your Mormon story. Were you born in Puerto Rico?
Yes, in 1982.
Okay.
Yes, born and raised in Puerto Rico. So
why are you laughing?
The age.
Oh. Because you're young or what?
Yes, sure.
How old are you?
I'm going to be 35 this 2 weeks.
Okay. So are you a millennial? Do you self-identify as a millennial?
Yes, I'm the beginning of the millennials, 1982, I believe. That's
okay. So born in Puerto Rico. Were you born under the covenant? Bajo el conviente? How do you say it in Spanish? Conveniente?
El convenio.
Convenio. I'm rusty. Yeah. Yes. Were you born under the covenant or were you a convert?
No, I was a convert to the
Tell
church.
us your story. Tell us your Mormon story.
So my mom was raised Catholic. But you probably know this, in Puerto Rico and other Latin countries, being Catholic doesn't mean really going to church. It's just something that you say. So she always says, I'm Catholic, but don't ask her to go to church. She won't go. And then my dad, he was raised Presbyterian, but he became secular with time when he was young. And so I kind of was raised first in that Puerto Rican Catholic culture. You can't separate both. Latin American culture has a lot of Catholic traditions, and to the point that it's hard to say, well, that's just Catholic tradition, because it's not. It's mixed with depending the country, right? Um, and yeah, and then my dad kept us or at least talked to us about like secularism, and his ideas about religion and things like that. So I grew up not thinking that religion was a good thing.
Okay.
The stories of the Catholic Church too, you learn in school, the Inquisition and things like that. You kind of learn that Catholic Church must not be true at all, must not be a church of God because of the things that they did. So that was my background before I met the church.
Would you have been aware of kind of the pedophilia, child abuse kind of stuff that had gone on, or would you not have been aware of that?
No, I was aware of that. I think everybody was back
Okay.
then and still are.
So you weren't thinking super good about religion growing up.
No. There's something a story I tell people. When I was a kid, this girl that liked me, she I remember she was like cursing at me for some reason. I realize now that she liked me. Back then I couldn't identify that. And I got called to her mom's office that worked at the school. She was a social worker. And I remember that the mom asked me, are you a religious person? And I said, no, I don't believe in religions. I don't go to churches. And she said, well, my daughter told me that you were cursing at her. And I was like, no, it's actually her. And she's like, no, you must be lying because you're not religious and my daughter is. And that was like, that completely like discouraged me from like going into religion because of that one conversation at that young age. I was probably in 4th, 5th grade.
That's kind of bigotry, right? Discrimination.
It doesn't just happen in the Mormon church. It happens everywhere.
Sure.
All religions, yeah.
Okay. So not a lot of great thoughts about religion.
No, it was my grandpa was the religion in my life. He always had these books for children with the stories from the Bible, and he had Bibles, and and he would mention God and things like that. So if anything, it was my grandpa, which is kind of probably what brought me into the church in a way. Because when he passed away and I was 15, 16, then I started like asking friends about religion, because his funeral was so sad to me. It was the first time somebody like that, so close to me, died. So I started to think about next life and those kind of things.
How old were you again?
I think I was 16.
Okay. So right around that age of awakening.
Yes. And then so I started asking for friends, like what the religions taught and things like that. And that's how I got into the church, because I asked my history teacher about his religion, and he shared a bit about it, and it sounded interesting. So I asked him more questions, and then he brought me pamphlets, and one of those pamphlets, I believe it doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't get printed. And it was the one talking about how many native cultures believed in some sort of God that sounded like Jesus.
Yeah. This is a really important part of our history growing up. For me in the 70s and 80s, we would have watched these film strips. I'm forgetting what they're called. Maybe our listeners can post them. But these movies or film strips about Quetzalcoatl, the great white god in Mesoamerica, how that really was Jesus. And, they would show these BYU archaeologists going through Mesoamerican temples, and they'd find some little dugout and they'd say this was a baptismal font clearly. And they would see some hieroglyphic that had a tree, and it's like, this was the tree of life from the Book of Mormon. And Ancient America Speaks, I think it was called, books and movies, basically saying if you were Native American, Latin American, you were a descendant of the pure blood of Israel, right?
Yes, and there's one that they didn't include in there, and it's the one from Puerto Rico. So there's a story that you learn in school. Turns out, after so many years, I've learned that it's like completely incorrect. But there's a story about this Spaniard. His name is Jose Salcedo, if I'm not mistaken. And you learn as a kid in school that supposedly they drowned him. The Indians drowned him. And they waited 3 days for him to wake up. And if he did, then that's how they knew the Spaniards were gods. And if he didn't, then that's how they learned, that he wasn't and they weren't. And that's how they started to fight against him. It's not a true story, but for some reasons, people just keep talking about it. So to me, listening to that story my whole life, it makes a lot of people question if like somehow they knew about God or Jesus and things like that because of the relationship. How would they know about the 3 days and Jesus? So as a history teacher, when he mentioned that, then he also mentioned, well, there are people who believe that, we're at school, so he can't really say things like that. So he just said, well, there are people who believe that maybe, God or Jesus came to the Americas. And that's why I asked him. And that's later when he brought me that pamphlet that explained all that stuff. So it just made sense.
Was he Mormon then?
Yes, he was.
He was Mormon.
Yes, he was. So it just made sense. And to the story of that, of those natives doing that to that Spaniard, that Jesus came to America, it was just the most sensible thing to believe. But
Yeah,
I was
because why would he
surprised
just visit those Europeans, right? Why not, or those, Middle Easterners? Why not Latin America too, right?
Right. So the Book of Mormon made sense back then. And so he told me about the Book of Mormon because I asked more questions, and so he gave me the Book of Mormon. I remember reading like 16 chapters that
Wow.
night because it just sounded like a really cool story, and then after that, then I just went back to him and kept asking questions. So he said, you should talk to the missionaries. And that's when he said, I'm from the Mormon church. And I said, is that like those guys from England or something like that go in that ride bikes? And that's what my dad taught back then.
Oh,
That it
okay.
was like some English church, and it was only white people allowed in that church.
Okay.
Because and that's something we can talk about now or later, because that's one of the things about the church. There's so many white missionaries, or at least back then in Puerto Rico, that I had no idea that Puerto Ricans went to that church.
Interesting.
It was a church of white people only, that they wouldn't allow anybody else.
Okay.
And so he's like, no, I go to that church too. There's tons of Puerto Ricans. And so that's how I got to, into the church, got baptized probably like 2 months later.
What'd your parents think?
They didn't want that. They hated it. Yes, they still hate the church. In their minds, the church did a bad thing to me. So, but it just, I was a kid. I didn't know much. So,
And what if you had to like break down the main things that converted you? What were they? What were the top 3 things that really pushed you to be converted? Now that you're looking back.
I always think one was my grandpa dying and thinking about afterlife, and I'd really want to see my grandpa. So the whole thing about families can be forever, and you can see your grandpa. Was such a beautiful thing to me.
You love your grandpa.
Yeah, and then second,
Abuelo, right? What'd you call him? Did
yeah,
you call him
abuelo,
abuelo or what'd you call him?
abuelito.
Abuelito, right? Okay.
And then the other part about the history of Latin America. I mean, it sounded like this book had this hidden history that historians didn't know about, and I always kept thinking, like, how come nobody knows about this? How come nobody has read this? And then the other thing
And
would
wait,
be,
and what did you like about the history? Like, did it told you more about who you were? That it said positive things about your ancestors, or just that it was new and different? What did you love about the history?
It was just, yeah, it was the whole idea about Jesus coming to America.
Okay.
That whole thing about him coming to America, it just made sense based on all the things that I heard when I was a kid growing
Okay.
up. It was an amazing thing to believe. Jesus didn't just go over there; he came over here too. It basically expanded religion, it expanded Bible, and everything that people believe. And then the third would be the other fact, which is the fact that um, of being gay, and as a 16-year-old who was suicidal, who was worried about um, being known that I was gay and things like that, and trying to not be gay, and finding religion as a way, because religion always promises, you can change, you can change. So 16-year-old, I saw that as a way to actually finally change and be.
So what was it like to discover feelings of same-sex attraction or a gay identity in the mid 90s in Puerto Rico?
It was hard. It's not like it is now. I mean, the way people talk about being gay or gay people, it was shameful to just be one. And I lived in a small town, Isabela. That's where I'm from, and that's 40,000 people. A lot of people know each other. I pretty much went to school with the same people from kindergarten until high school. So, and they made fun of me and things like that because back then I was more flamboyant than now. So I got teased my whole life for it. So I really hated the idea that I was gay, or that people would just say that I was gay. So yeah, I didn't want to. So the Mormon church.
Was it unsafe for you to be gay in Puerto Rico at the
Back then,
time?
yes, I got beat up all the time.
They thought your friends were kind of, did you tell them, or did they just kind of figured?
No, I in my mind, I was not gay.
Okay, but they thought you were because of how you acted.
Yes, and in my mind, obviously, yes, I like guys, but I just always thought, well, I bet I just find them attractive, and other guys can also find them attractive. They just don't want to accept it. But that was not the case, and they saw something I couldn't see. The movement of my hands. I don't know what it was, but I got beat up all the time for it. And so I really hated it. I didn't want to be in school. I remember telling my mom, I just don't want to be in school. I don't want to go back, and my mom would get mad at me for it. But
You were bullied.
all the time, all
I'm
the
so
time.
sorry.
So it was really hard.
And so Mormonism was a way to avoid that and to not be gay. It was a way to hetero yourself as much as possible.
Yes, it's like fresh water.
What do you mean? What do you mean, like fresh water?
Well, a opportunity to change, to that God would convert me and make me a straight man, and new things, learning new things with the Book of Mormon and things like that, and the opportunity to believe that there was eternal life and things like that. So yeah, it was just like drinking fresh water.
Ah,
Something new.
wow. Okay. And so you joined at age 16. What was the mutual, what was it called? Mutual? What'd you call it? Young men, young women?
Yes, Mutual.
Did you have
Yeah.
a good branch or ward?
So it was a branch. Not a lot of people in that branch. Probably, I think it was like 15. Maybe the most was 30 people on a Sunday.
Whoa, in the whole, not just youth, in the whole branch.
Yeah, that was it. So there was not a lot of young people. There was only one other young girl that went to school with me, and we became friends actually more. She was not much of my friend until I joined the church.
Hmm.
And to be honest, it's different. It's not like church here in Utah. Over there, since the church is so small, people like really support each other, and it becomes like family. So I remember the first day going into church. It was like the most beautiful experience ever, because people just were so excited that somebody new was there, and it was a kid. And till today, I mean, I love those people, and I hope they see this one of these days, you know. But yeah, these are people who I love very much, and
they loved you when you came into that branch.
yes, I felt basically from being bullied by everybody to finding a home, or some place where everybody loved me, everybody didn't care, they wanted to support me, they wanted me to spend time with them, and it was just an amazing experience.
You were probably the only kid that passed the sacrament, huh?
Pretty much. And this other kid that was the brother of that young woman I was talking about that went to school with me. So
it's like you divided up the chapel, and half of you got one side and one of you got the other.
Yeah, pretty much. It was him. His name is Ali. It was him and I for the Aaronic priesthood class. That was it. It was the branch president was our teacher. That was it.
Wow.
That's how small it is.
So where is this pueblo in Puerto Rico, like in the island? Where would it be?
Northwest.
Okay, northwest.
If people are familiar with Puerto Rico, a lot of people are familiar with Aguadilla because of the airport there, and I'm just the next one. So
okay. All right. So you have this great, wonderful youth experience, I guess, in your Rama in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
What comes next?
I did seminary for 1 year, the last year.
By yourself?
Yeah, and her, me and her.
Okay.
And it was her mom that was teaching us.
And this is all in Spanish, right?
It's all in Spanish, yes.
Okay. All right.
But by the way, sometimes we would have white families come because of the military base next door. So
okay.
And then after that, I went to the university, first year of university, and that's met new friends. Life was different and new place. And
what was the university called?
University of Puerto Rico.
And what city is that in?
In Rio Piedras.
Okay.
It's San Juan, but they call it that area is called Rio Piedras.
Okay. And were you like a really good student, an average student, not so good?
Yeah, I was a pretty good student. Yes, pretty good grades, and so I got accepted to one of the most prestigious universities in Puerto Rico. So,
and your English is phenomenal. Did you learn English growing up, or what?
Yes, as best as I could, and then I think I just got better with time.
Okay,
and
but you didn't. Your primary and secondary education wasn't in English, was it, or was it?
In Puerto Rico, you grow up having one English class every year.
Oh, okay, because I guess it's a protectorate, or what is it?
It's a territory of the United States.
Okay.
Yes, so you have to learn English, and it's just one class, and it's not the best, but you learn something.
Do most Puerto Ricanos end up speaking English pretty well then, or?
I think the newer or the younger generations, yes.
Okay.
The older generations, not really. But the youngers are learning more. And then some move to the United States and come. So it just, yeah.
So what'd you study at the university?
I was just doing generals that first year, and I got into institute. Not only was I the president of seminary class, because,
there were two
people. And then later there was one more, but that was it. And then later, I was the president of institute too. But it was a larger group, maybe 6 or 7 of us, maybe a little bit more.
So big.
Yes, the church is so small in Puerto Rico. I checked on their website; they claim 23,000 members.
Okay.
And the church started 70 years ago, exactly 70 years ago. So 70 years for 23,000 members. That's like 333 members a year, which they don't, they didn't get that every year.
Now, Dominican Republic has more Mormons, right?
Yes, they do. I think 1% of the population now.
So why the difference? What's the difference between the two countries, do you think?
Are
they close to each other? Are they even close to each other?
Yes, it's the next island. But it's a totally different situation. Puerto Rico, it's the United States.
So
Um,
socioeconomically, it's much more like the United States.
yes, the way we think, our laws, things like that. So it's pretty much the United States. Um, and then the Dominican Republic is a totally different country. I mean, our cultures are similar, but because of the inability of them to just fly to Puerto Rico unless they have the paperwork and things like that, they have to cross illegally most of the time. So I think that has made both countries to not have connections and in terms of culture. So yes, there are definitely things that are different. And I went on a mission there at 19.
To Dominican Republic.
Yes, that's where I
Oh
got
wow!
sent.
So did my nephew Thomas Hatton. I don't know if you know Thomas, but
No, I don't.
so do you call it the DR?
The DR, yes.
So you went to the DR in your mission.
Yes. And the cool thing about it was that was and most that year I went on a mission. That was the year until then where Puerto Rico had sent the most missionaries ever in a year. And most of them were like people I knew. And most of them went to California or El Salvador, something like that. It was only 3 Puerto Ricans on that mission.
Wow.
That was it. There's not that many missionaries that leave the church. There's not that many members, even though they claim the 23,000. I believe there should be maybe 3,000 or less active members of the church in Puerto Rico.
That's about a stake, basically.
Yes, and right now they have 5 stakes and 2 districts, and that's in one of the districts is the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the UK Virgin Islands too.
So Puerto Rico is not a stronghold for Mormonism in Latin
No,
America.
it they thought it would be. I think they're losing money with it. The missions are completely different compared to the Dominican Republic. In Puerto Rico, missionaries have cars. A lot of them. In the DR, they won't even have cars. It's hard for the missionaries in Puerto Rico. They people really believe that this is just a white church, and it's not like the DR. The DR people doesn't know much about the church. They see the missionaries, coming from America. I remember dealing with some of them thinking that somehow they would just get papers and the church will help them go to the United States. Um, so it's totally different. Puerto Rico is way more secular than people think. There's not that many Catholic people as the DR. And it all has to do with American culture. The Protestants going to Puerto Rico way back when the United States invaded and teaching people not to believe in the Catholic Church. So there's more Protestants and there's more of those ideas. So people just are more educated maybe and things like that. So it's a totally different situation, and it's really hard for missionaries to baptize. They don't get as many people baptized in the church in Puerto Rico. I think I baptized like around 50 people on my mission. And in the DR, that's a really good number. And missionaries in Puerto Rico, they'll be lucky if they baptize 2 people and sometimes 1 family. That's like very lucky for them.
I'm gonna take a long shot here. One of my dear childhood friends and my roommate my freshman year at BYU was named Monty McCotter, and Monty was killed as a missionary in Puerto Rico. I'm
Wow.
wondering if you would have ever heard about that. It might have been before your time. It was in 1990.
Yeah, I joined the church 1999
Okay,
probably.
so yeah, you wouldn't have heard about that. Okay, wanted to try. Okay, so Puerto Rico's not super strong, but you had a great mission. Is that right?
Yes. I learned a lot from the Dominican people. A lot of, I'm not one of those people that would say, the mission was a terrible thing. I mean, I regret the things that I was teaching, but I don't regret going there and what I learned from them. I believe I've learned more values from them and more beautiful things than I ever learned from the church.
Like what?
Um, this is one good example. People over there, if they were eating and you walked into their homes while they were eating, they offer their plates. They will offer their food. They will stop eating and say, this, your guest, you can have my food. That's amazing. And the way people are just so happy and friendly and smiles. They just smile all the time. And and the members, like, it's just, people there are just so humble. So they don't see, they're poor, but they don't see things like we do. I felt rich, and I'm a poor person. My family is poor. When I went there, I felt rich compared to the people there. In the terms of money, but it was just amazing. These people have like big hearts. They love everybody. They just they're just amazing. Like that that was the way they don't care about money like we do. The church just seems like a money machine, and the members care so much about being rich and becoming wealthy, and they are not like that. They just value different things. They value family, they value friendship, they value neighbors. It's a totally different experience for sure.
Okay,
um
so you love the people of the DR, and they changed your life in some ways.
yes, that's I'd really felt that way my whole life, that they changed the way I approach things, and probably for forever. Yeah, so I can't complain about that. I will complain about what we were teaching to these people, how some of my companions were racist to the people. And I'll give you an example. We had mates, because over there money is just, US dollars just are, so good. So we had maids, we had sisters from the church who would come and clean our clothes, do our breakfast, do our lunch, and they would leave, and we would pay them from our allowance. um And to me, there were just sisters from the church helping us, so that it was easier for us to do the missionary work. For some of these missionaries, they were not sisters from the church helping us. To them, they were basically like slaves. Like the way they treated them, yell at them, make them like cook food if it didn't taste good, so that they would just get a new plate, and just, it was just so awful. It was,
Now, were these Puerto Ricanos or were these North Americans, gringos?
most of the people I live with were from Utah.
Okay, so you weren't really impressed with how respectful the Utahns were towards the help.
Yes, as somebody coming from the church in Puerto Rico, where you are being taught that the church is perfect, and the members are change, and they're much better people than other people, to come to a mission where it's full of like these kids coming from the headquarters of the church, and they act so much worse. It was just awful. Like, I just couldn't believe these people were sent on a mission. That's how bad it was. I just, I couldn't, I just was baffled by Bishop sending these kids on missions, because how selfish they were, how um bad they were, how like this. Yeah, it was just awful.
Now, tell us about when you were first exposed to the teachings about the Lamanites and the dark skin and the curse and all that. When do you remember first being exposed to all those teachings?
Reading the Book of Mormon.
So
And
you remember, how old are you? 16?
yeah, 16,
So you're
17.
reading it, and what's going through your mind as you're reading about this stuff?
I always felt uncomfortable with it. I think a lot of people, because I would go out also with the missionaries in Puerto Rico just to help them out as a member, and people really didn't like that. Didn't like that part about people just turning dark because of a curse, and they also didn't like the part about Nephi cutting a man's beheading a man just to get some plates. People really did not like that when missionaries would just read from the Book of Mormon to investigators.
Okay. And what did you think? I mean, you joined. What did you think about all that?
Well, let's say this. What the missionary that was teaching me, there were two missionaries, Aldred and Miss Smith. He claimed that he was a descendant of Joseph Smith. He actually kind of looked like Joseph Smith. So Elder Smith, and this is how I got into the church, told me one time, you don't have to believe these things we're saying, if you pray to God, and God will give you an answer, and you will know that the church is true. And you will feel the certain way, and they give you the whole speech about that. And so I did that as a convert, and I got my response. I got those feelings that you feel so great, and I thought that was it. I thought that it was the true church. And so reading things like that didn't make sense to me, but I had to trust that response from God, that it was the true church, that there was just me. I wasn't understanding something, but somehow God knew what was going on, and he did it right.
But you remember not understanding that?
Yes. Like it just was off.
What part did you read? Do you remember reading a specific part that seemed off and what you thought when you read it?
Well, I mean, I remember that night reading 16 chapters, but I don't think that's where it talks about it. But it was just off that God would just make people dark. And then reading the whole Book of Mormon later, then reading that he actually turned them back white. No, I mean, not the same group, other groups, just because they behave certain way. So they started to turn white.
You didn't like that?
No, I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
Why would God do such a thing? And why does skin color make any sense with the whole picture of the whole story? Why cursing people with something like that? It's just so ridiculous. And it's just not, and I knew science enough to understand that it's not just the skin, it's the way people look too. So you're telling me that God is changing people from like certain features to a completely Caucasian look? That's just off. That's
right.
just,
Did they still have the Latin features, but with white skin?
yeah. What's the explanation?
Do their eye color? Are they still brown eyed? Right.
Right. It just, the church just doesn't know what is going on. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
What would a Latino with dark brown hair and dark brown eyes and then white skin? I wonder what that would look like. Would it look weird?
I don't know. I mean, there's so many like that. It just, but in my mind, I was thinking like, what are you talking about? Like, they're just making them with blue eyes and blonde hair. Like,
right. Does their nose change? Yeah.
Changes.
Okay.
Like, what is this? But somehow I had to trust that.
Okay.
And by, I just became a fan of the church because back in my mind, being raised as a secular person and always like loving science and things like that, I always had in my mind certain idea that if the Catholic Church back in the day, everybody believed it was the true church and it was the church of God. And having learned that was not the case through history and what scientists did, like Galileo Galilei, and how the church treated them, in the back of my mind, I always had this idea like, I need to still read more about this church just in case any of this is just not true. But that idea that I had the answer from God from back then, it always kept me in the church. But I still read and read and read, and on my mission I kept reading and doctrines of salvation and these awful things about Black people and Joseph Smith giving the priesthood and to women and all these things that I will bring up to my companions on the mission, and they either never heard about or didn't like the way I was talking about it, but they were still nice to me because I was a nice kid. So, you know, I knew more more than at least the people I live with on my mission.
The Utahns.
Yes.
And this was Doctrinas de Salvación, the Spanish version of
Yeah.
Joseph Fielding Smith's.
Salvación
Weren't there like 3 volumes or something?
yes.
I had those. I read those on my mission.
Yeah, and you were supposed to read those, and then the Miracle of Forgiveness, which was a book that like scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, because did you read that?
Being gay, yes, I read the whole thing.
Did you understand what it meant and what it was saying? And
yeah, and it scared me, because I kept praying every day on my mission that God would just take those feelings away. But obviously it never happened. And the last book the last chapter is the nice one where, you read about, God can forgive you and things like that. But reading that was awful. Like, it really scarred me as a missionary. I was afraid to even like be open and say like, I'm having these feelings and I'm having these thoughts. So I wouldn't even mention any of that because of that book. And we were supposed to read all of them as part of like this educational thing where it was like either you were terrestrial, celestial missionary. And if you were celestial, you were supposed to read certain books, terrestrial more books, and celestial more. So I did the whole thing all the way to celestial and got my certificate as a really good missionary. But yes, these things, they made me question little by little the church and things that I was learning about the church. And then I came back from my mission. Coming back to a place like Puerto Rico where there's not that many members, there's no temple, there's no support structure. I felt lonely, and I felt I need to go to Utah. I need to move.
There's no temple in Puerto Rico, or there wasn't. Okay.
There were plans, but as soon as the growth started to happen in the DR with the priesthood ban being removed, then they decided to just do the temple in the DR.
Okay.
And then they abandoned the idea of Puerto Rico.
Really quick, let's check in with our listeners. Melissa writes, "The miracle of forgiveness is one that left me thinking I should be dead." That's a sad report.
Suicidal.
Yeah. Oslo Justo writes, "I experienced the same thing with missionaries from Spain looking down on the Mexican members, elders, and sisters." So Oslo Justo, there's a hymn, Haz tu lo justo, right?
Haz lo justo, yes.
Haz tu lo justo, más que te cueste,
You get the
right?
ring and everything, yes.